Mark, welcome to Political Hope.
Thanks for having me, Indy.
Yeah, so jumping right into it, what does political hope mean to you?
Oh, wow. Every day it's a fight. You're fighting to find hope, right? Because some days we feel like we really have our backs to the wall, don't we? I mean, we feel like it's going to it's hopeless. Hopelessness seems to outweigh or overshadow hope. But so I think it takes extra resolve, which is maybe good because that strengthens our muscles. It strengthens our political and spiritual muscles to have some resistance, And there's no lack of resistance in terms of authoritarian presence in our lives and frustrations and trying to bring about social, economic, and environmental justice. But I don't know. I guess I've always been. Sometimes I'm accused of being optimistic,
Too
and
optimistic, Mark. Turn down your optimism. That's too much.
I try to. I try that. I try that dial just doesn't work. I have to get a repairman to come in and work on it. But yeah, I sometimes get accused of being overly optimistic in my writing and in my talking, but maybe it's just the way I was brought up. But I also, I guess, fortunately, I have the advantage. Sometimes it feels like an advantage of age, and age allows me to see that progress has been made. Sometimes it's incremental, and sometimes it's one step forward and two steps back. But it does feel like there's progress, and I guess that's why I retain my optimism and don't seem to want to get that dial repaired in my life.
I really value that. I mean, obviously, I also get accused of being aggressively optimistic a lot because I want people to be healthy aggressively,
Yeah,
and I want there to be. I don't want us to compromise in any way in health of the humans and health of
exactly.
ecology. And it's like, why are you so aggressive with your optimism? It's okay, you know. But I want to honor you too. Some of the some of the talks I heard. I mean, even when you spoke at the Farm Stop conference where we met, but also in other talks that I've in my research and in prepping for this conversation, there's a word that kept coming up, and I think it's alive in your answer to what you believe is political hope is the word of countervalence. Maybe can you like expound on that? Because that's, I mean, I think of that in physics and chemistry as well, but like I can't help but also think about that in the a sense of optimism compared to the pessimism that exists and the cynicism that exists. So,
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to I'm not sure I have this exactly correct, but the idea of a countervailing force. And maybe I first encountered it in reading some of the work of John Kenneth Galbraith, the economist, and finding that, that in America, I mean, we've have typically found some force that will push back against another force. And yeah, you can certainly look at it in terms of physics. I'm sure there's a great explanation there. Um, I was not a successful physics student, so I can't give you any formulas to work with here. But I can tell you that I've seen it in social movements all the time. Labor unions are perhaps one of the best examples of a countervailing force. Um, Even small what are sometimes labeled as fringe movements, whether they're socialist or communist or other are also a countervailing force, even because they offer us an alternative
right.
and they push back and they have. So I think that to me, in my world has been about food. That's been my career, and that's been the thing that gives me the most excitement, and that's where my passion lies. And with that, I think that that one of the greatest countervailing forces has been the what I would call the food movement over the last, I'm not sure where you want to start it. I could easily start it in the 1960s
Mhm.
and say, hey, this was a an effort to give us some alternative, if not more than that, to a food system and a food supply that had become increasingly dominated by large corporate interests, food that was not healthy,
Mhm.
food that often was not available to very large segments of our communities, bringing about things terms like hunger. I mean, we had hunger in the United States of America. What an insult! What a humiliation to have to admit that we had that, and yet it was prevalent and increasingly prevalent, and so anyway, that people pushed back, and that became a very powerful countervailing force. And I was also a very big part of the anti-war movement, and that's for the everybody under 50. That was the Vietnam War we're talking about, and people pushed back. There was a very strong countervailing force to the Vietnam War, which I think contributed to bringing it to a close sooner than it would have been, and saving more lives than would have been, otherwise lost if the war continued. So, the countervailing force of an anti-war movement, the countervailing force of a healthy food movement, healthy food for all movement, a food security for everybody. Those are good, solid movements historically in this country that have proven to be successful. And I think we have as much as we can bemoan, the continuing failures of our food system right now, we have to admit to, and it's not just optimistic Mark Winne here, but we have to admit to progress, enormous progress in the quality of our health of healthy food. I mean, the availability of healthy food. Now we have a big affordability problem right now,
Mhm.
and that goes into a whole other discussion about policy, which I imagine we'll get to later on. But I don't want to, jump your gun here. So that's countervailing forces. I think are critical, a critical part, and people shouldn't overlook the fact that even though you may or 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 feel frustrated by the fact that maybe you're small or you might be considered a fringe element or you're just starting out as some minute part of a change process. Change happens, and you are that seed. You are the beginning of that, and hang in there, because 10 or 20 years from now, you're going to be a major part of a force that counters the negative forces in this world.
That's so well said, Mark. And I can't help but also feel, the pressure when we speak about food. And it's weird to even think that it's countervailing or it's fringe to want food security. Like that's
I
seems
know.
like I feel like we've been doing that forever, like humans. I mean, it's weird.
You're right. It is weird. I talk about it all the time, so it becomes more normal for me. It doesn't be as not as weird, but yes, it is. It is bizarre to think about it in the United States that we have. It depends on what set of numbers. 40, 50, 60 million people that are probably in some category of food insecurity, not knowing where their next meal is coming from. Going through all kinds of weird adaptive behaviors in order to get food on the table. I mean, including parents not eating so
Mhm.
that their children can eat. I mean, we may not see that as third world hunger, but it is a very clear and accept a very clear and obvious form of food insecurity.
Yes.
From dumpster diving to all kind, even the greatest adaptation we have made with respect to food insecurity in this country is the evolution of the emergency food system, the world of food pantries and
Yep.
food banks and so-called soup kitchens. Over the years, I mean, this has become a very dominant force in trying to counter food insecurity in this country. And while I have enormous respect for the people that have worked so hard to do that, it still makes me a little bit crazy to think that this is how we solve a problem like that. is that the right way to be solving a problem as major as food insecurity, as hunger, bad nutrition? Um, it's not we in the United States. This is to use the large scale food uh, pantry food banking model as a dominant feature of trying to address food insecurity is very unusual in the developed world. They don't really have comparable systems in terms of size or scope in Europe or developed portions of Asia. So it's a little odd, but it's a very dominant feature of the food security landscape.
It is. I mean, it's interesting because I personally toggle with this the ideas of food security versus food sovereignty, right? And a lot of that, and they could be considered the same thing, but they're different in how we orient. And I mean, just to give you an example, Mark. So I'm on the advisory council on aging for our county in Contra Costa. Somehow I'm in that space. I don't know how I'm there. But as I'm in those meetings and asking questions, and folks come, different organizations come and speak, and then we ask questions from the county health director to the Meals on Wheels to the, like you said, there's food banks, there's all these different organizations, right, that are distributing food to seniors. And this is like guaranteed millions of dollars. And I dug deeper, I did some research, and there's a transnational organization out of France that basically has cornered the market on all the distribution. I mean, basically providing all the food that the seniors gets. Like they have like 99 point something percent of the
Mhm.
market. So most of the food they're bringing is from out of the country. Like they're getting stuff, canned
Oh,
stuff and whatever out of the country. So you
mhm.
have millions of dollars that local taxpayers are paying to support their local seniors. Just to start with that, right? We don't have to go anywhere else. But
Right.
none of that money is going to local farmers, even though we have a whole farming, we have tons and tons of farms that are falling apart, losing their business right here in Contra Costa County,
Yeah.
but they're not feeding, there's like a clear missing thing.
Yeah,
So
it's
food
crazy. That's
sovereignty,
another
food security,
crazy
right?
thing. Well, that harkens back to you want another facet of that, which is known as the farm to school program. I
Right?
mean, it was kind of, I got involved in that in the late, well, kind of the latter part of the 1990s. There suddenly was this realization that all the largely crappy food that our children were eating in public schools was none of it was locally grown, none of it was sourced from local farmers, and even wasn't really sourced from local food manufacturers. It all came from far away, and that to me just, and to many people, it just seemed ridiculous. So why not create this, a system whereby our children could be eating locally grown food, the money that is there, and it was public funds, federal government funds, being available to local school districts to buy food. Why are they buying it from the largest, Cisco and other large
Yep, yep,
suppliers?
exactly.
Why not buy from local farmers? So, hence, fast forward many years, yeah, we now have, I haven't, the most recent numbers I've seen, which are maybe a year or two old, are that, over half of our public schools now are actually have a farm to school program. Half. And that's like 50,000, that's like, it's like 99,000 schools, public schools in this, including all the elementary and middle schools and so forth. Half of them are buying food from local producers. I mean, just think about that. That's a huge leap forward
Yep.
over about 30 years now. And public funds, in some cases, other funds that come from, well, local money as well as federal money. Sometimes state funds also are used. And again, I find myself, whenever I'm explaining something, I find myself stumbling into policy again, public policy. But people get sick of it. I don't want to hear any more about that. And I say, okay, well, that's kind of that's kind of the story. However, more importantly, going back to that connection, little children eating food that was grown 10 miles away rather than being imported
Yep.
thousands of miles. That's not rocket science. That's just common sense. And I think about it. I remember this one experience I had in California, in Southern California, in San Bernardino area, and I met with a farmer who had about 10, 20 acres or so of oranges, and he had started selling them into the Los Angeles Unified School District.
Nice.
And he had these beautiful, beautiful, graceful old orange trees. I don't know what variety they were, but they were just big, beautiful things. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Yeah, those trees are 100 years old. It's a 100-year-old orange tree." And the thing that's really unique about this orange tree, he would tell me, was that come here, we'll come. So I walked down. I'm standing under this orange tree. It was loaded with oranges, and the oranges were quite small. Much smaller than you might normally find in a supermarket. And he holds it in his big farmer hand, and it just almost completely dwarfs the orange. And he said, "These are perfect for children. They're small." And what also happens when they get smaller and the tree gets older is that the sweetness is concentrated. So it becomes a more tasty orange for the children,
Whoa.
easy to handle. Not some big
Yeah.
gargantuan thing that a child has a time manipulating. And I don't know, little stories like that, little connections that get made, I think and they're not just charming, but they also lead to, better nutrition. They lead to economic viability for local farmers. They lead to just the building of community that takes place when local producers are selling into local schools. So, yeah, you're going back to your senior center or maybe a meal program example. There are now ways, there's now more use of those funds in different places around the country to source locally and support local economies at
Right.
the same time. So it's a win-win-win right on down the line.
Yeah, and I feel I'm glad you brought in the farmer there because as myself I'm a farm worker. I would say I'm call myself more of a farm worker before a farmer or a farm owner because there's distinctions, right, between people who own a lot of farmland, a farmer who's a farm manager, and then a farm worker. And the nuance on that also is kind of a part of this conversation because one of the things I really value about your work, and I'll pose the question in a second, but like finishing this thought is how can farm workers, and this, you don't have to answer this question, but this is like just a question for all of us. How can farm workers be a part of this question of food policy? When we think about the people who are actually doing the labor on the land, who are doing the labor of caring, who are also not being exposed to pesticides while they're doing the labor, to provide this food. These are all nuances that are really important, I feel. But on that note, how does you brought up the farm to school and all these things, and you brought up policy, but one of the things that I feel is really important about your legacy and what you've done, Mark, and what the seeds you've planted, literally and figuratively, is around food policy councils and what they do and how they do it. And I imagine they played a part in the farm to school movement. I imagine food policy councils, but how could also a food policy council help steward us towards these issues, right? Farm worker pay, safety of, and the quality of the food that's being grown, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah, yeah, easy question.
blah.
Well, I think I'm going to take just one step back before, and it's the idea. I think what we have to keep in our heads is this idea of a food system,
Right.
of all these different parts, from literally from seed to table, or from even seed to table to compost pile, and you have to understand the interrelationships. And if you only get focused on, let's say, the health and well-being of children, as important as that is, you tend to forget about where that food is produced. You forget about, or you don't think about the laborers you're talking about who are picking the food or processing the food or even working in some very difficult food processing, meat packing type facilities as well.
Totally.
And you may be disconnected from, the farmer, him or herself, who is trying to is working real hard to make a living and is often butting up against, a very big corporate dominated food distribution system and at a real disadvantage. All these connections are what we call the food system.
Mhm.
And so a good place to think about and work on the food system are food policy councils. And that's an area which I've done a lot of work in over the last 30 years. And, it to me, it's like I can have a person at the table who is a farm laborer. I can have a person at the table who is a farmer. I can have a food service director from a local school, et cetera, et cetera. I can have the whole food system right there at this nice big table where we're also munching on locally produced food and having conversations about all these connections. And so it comes up, it comes up for the why, what are the conditions that the farm laborer is working under? Are they healthy? Do there need to be changes in the way that work is practiced? Are there regulations that have to be uh, created in order to protect the health and well-being of the worker? And the environment and so forth. So we start to look at all the impacts that our food system has on different aspects of our lives. And when we look at as well as the individuals, the human beings that do the work or who are going to be affected. And and that's where the Food Policy Council, that word, the operative word there being policy, again, that it comes around to, are there some changes that have to be made here? And where do we make those changes? And where is the power to make those changes? Um, because everybody in that system needs to be protected,
Yeah.
every piece of it. And, I like to think, boy, this is a place where not only is everybody represented, but it's a place, it's the only voice, so to speak, for that larger food system. It's the only voice for the people who are not getting enough to eat. It's the only voice for the laborer who may be, subjected to all kinds of toxic agricultural materials during their workday. So it's a humbling, when I stop and think about it, it's a very humbling experience to be sitting there with people with all those backgrounds and all that knowledge, where you have the capacity, hopefully, to make some change and to identify the problems.
So when you say, Mark, a food policy council, like I imagine you're kind of speaking about the spectrum of it, right? There could be like grassroots people coming together in a community wanting to do something about food in their community. But then it could be like also it could be like a government generated or government approved food council as well that's kind of working side by side or parallel, or a committee that one of the
Yeah.
councils or whatever makes it, could be both, everything in between that too,
Yeah, I mean, they come in different shapes and sizes, okay, and
like
flavors.
fruits and vegetables, yeah.
Like flavor, yeah, they're flavors. They're like, big oranges and little oranges, and
Nice.
everything can be reduced to a food metaphor if we
Great.
try hard enough.
Touche.
But yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of time working on these things. There's over 300 food policy councils in the country, and I'm going to say maybe half to a little more than half are maybe have a statewide focus,
Okay.
and the rest of them are more local. Local being like Los Angeles has a food policy council. Um, I I'm here in New Mexico. We have a state food policy, New Mexico Food Policy Council,
Huh.
or Food and Farm Policy Council. Um, in many places you have a combination city and county
Mhm.
food policy council. I mean, New York City doesn't have an official food policy council, but they have, interestingly enough, they have a fairly large number of city staff who work on food policy. Now that wasn't normal 10 years ago.
Huh.
The number of councils, the extent of government's engagement on food issues was very limited. And again, it speaks to the growing interest in food as a way to change society. It speaks to the complexity of the food system and how we need to understand the connections. But to me, it's been another, like the farm to school movement, for instance, the evolution of citizen engagement and engagement with um, uh, cities and counties and states, government. That has been another sign of really significant progress. Another reason why I tend to be optimistic is that we see that kind of engagement and participation by cities and counties and state government. And it's just because again, that's where the changes can be made.
Yep.
That's where I have in a federal government like we have now, there's not a day to day, there's not a lot of reason to be optimistic. But boy, I can go to my city, I can go to my county, I can go to my state, and I can get change made. I can make stuff happen. I still need, the strong shoulders of federal government, and we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
This our nightmare will end in the not too distant future. Yeah, it's ups and downs, and we'll go back. But in the meantime, and continuing, I think people working at a local level, state level, there's some real opportunity for change to take place and good work to take place at those locations.
Yeah, I really value that too because I mean personally I've been involved, invited, and also participated in different food councils. One of them was in Hawaii on the in Oahu, and I must say, Mark, if you need if you need to dangle any carrot, regeneratively grown healthy carrot to anyone, it's that food councils and food systems networks and food anything food policy related that people are doing, the food is always going to be really good at that place. Even the Farm Stop conference, right?
I don't like, yeah, I don't talk about that. I don't talk about it. I've eaten really well in my lifetime, and it's because of my work. I don't get paid. I don't get paid very well, but I sure eat well.
Well, that's good. That contributes to also our mental health, our physical health, our
Oh
ability.
yeah, it's my pleasure. It's a pleasure zone experience.
So if anybody needs an excuse to go to a food policy or start one, right? It's a great way. But then also, one of the things I found this great presentation you gave, and you gave like a list of all the purposes of a food policy council. But I'm curious, instead of going through each one, just like if it was a class, I mean, we're not in a classroom, so fortunately. But I'm curious right now, like based on what's happening in our country and based on what you know right now, like the nuances, right, between the federal and the state and the local governments. What do you feel, what purposes of the food policy councils do you feel that we should be focusing on or kind of sharpening our arrows around?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think yeah, I'll take a step back. I'll take like about a 6 year step back,
Nice.
which is when COVID started. COVID started, and you know, amidst all the chaos and the tragedy that was occurring day by day, hour by hour, our food supply, our food system was at risk.
Right.
And there were many, many examples of the food system failing, collapsing, the food being left in the field, people becoming more hungry.
Right.
And there was that recent, I've been associated with Johns Hopkins University and something called the Center for a Livable Future. And one thing that they did was a lot of work with food policy councils. And recently they completed a survey on how food policy councils intervened during COVID.
Oh,
And it was a fascinating look at what happens when people who really know their local food system. They know like the directors of food service for the school.
mhm.
They know the county commissioners. They know the farmers, they have that kind of very personal, upfront
Right.
knowledge, and they can when they get they can fix problems. That even in the shadow of something as deadly and terrifying as COVID, they can fix problems because they are there and they know. And that's what the survey showed, is that the Food Policy Council were an effective force in intervening in what could have been a much more serious situation with respect to hunger and food insecurity, poor nutrition, and so forth. They made this help make the system work so that people ate pretty well during that period. Now I bring that fast forward back up, say up here to the present. We have a federal administration that disregards human life. It disregards the health and well-being of its own people, and it has cut food stamps. It has eliminated a really helpful tool called the survey on household food security. They completely eliminated that. I was actually had a very small part in creating that survey back in the 1990s.
Wow.
It was a way for us to identify the number of hungry people
Right.
and provide, good data on what was the extent of that hunger and what were some of the causes and how could we correct it.
Right.
It was a very important tool, and it was administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Trump has wiped it out, along with all kinds of other important research related to health, uh, nutrition, um, poverty, social economic hardship. All of these things are, they're either been wiped out or they're limping along. And so I'm getting to my point. Don't worry. It's there, and it's that food policy councils, as they did with COVID, have been intervening, have been trying to correct the situations, the gaps, the major gaps that have been created by the Trump administration. And I know in my state of New Mexico, the state legislature convened last when did it convene? Not too long ago. They convened to provide additional funds to assist people who in the state who were losing their food stamps, were losing SNAP benefits, and so state funds were used to fill that gap. Also for senior citizens, there was a couple of programs that have been set up to help them with nutrition needs, and that were federally paid for by the federal government, and they, again, the legislature stepped up and filled those gaps. Now, you can't do that forever. There's no way you can have the state governments make up for all the money that has been lost for Medicaid, SNAP, and other programs and services. But it was the food policy councils that that provided information, that did the advocacy work, that was able to leverage money out of state governments so that it could meet the needs of its own people.
Right.
Yeah, so that's it's those are crises. Those are two examples of a crisis: COVID and the Trump administration, and the hardship that those two crises have imposed on the American people.
Mhm.
But again, it's we take care of our own, which is a line I stole from Bruce Springsteen, that we take care of our own. And one way we do that is to be able to provide funding and help and support for those who are needy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that too, that you gave two different examples because, when I think about policy, yeah, and I know that people have an aversion to getting to that space, but, we can get too caught up in projects And I see this all the time, and with a lot of well-intentioned people who are like, some work with indigenous people, some work with folks in poverty spaces, some are just trying to solve big problems, right? Poly-crisis issues, and they're hyper focused on projects. Like my project or this project, and is this project. But I feel like policy goes upstream from the projects. It sets the foundation for the projects to thrive rather than like one project working or not working, and then you don't get the thing, and then every runs out of juice. But like, maybe can you elaborate on that? Like the difference between
Yeah, no,
policy.
it's a very, I'm glad you used that term, upstream. It's upstream. I've been hearing it lately, upstream examples versus downstream examples. And, our food pantries, as much as I love them and God bless their work and their compassion and their concern, are, decidedly a downstream solution. But the good news has been that over the years, different groups have organized the food pantries, organized those, local people, volunteers working out of church basements and so forth to feed the hungry, organize them to go to their state capital, to go to the state legislature or the city council, in some cases even go to Congress
Mhm.
and speak up and say, you know, we can't be dealing with this from a downstream perspective forever. We're never gonna, what's the old parable of all the babies are going down the stream and we can't, dying, and we got to go upstream and figure out
Right.
why these deaths are occurring in the
Yep.
first place. And so they've done that. I can say goodbye to Stan. And that's what it is. It's like they have to be able to have the capacity, and the know-how to go upstream and begin to find out what these problems are. And that's, again, you say, this it's poverty. It's the incredible, wealth and income gap we have in this country.
And it's getting bigger.
And it's enormous, and it has grown since the 1970s. The gap between the rich and the poor has grown
Mhm.
every year, and it's gotten worse and worse. And now we have, as if America has done something really bad and God is punishing us. They sent the Trump administration as a form of punishment, and we are now enduring yet, more exasperating, tax policies and so forth that benefit the rich and benefit billionaires at the expense of poor people. I mean,
Yeah.
how crazy! We cut taxes for the rich, and we cut benefits for the poor who rely on SNAP to feed their children. So anyway, yeah,
It,
upstream, downstream, and keep that in mind. Now, sometimes you got to do both. You got to do both. You got to like, which gets a little schizophrenic because you got to keep, one leg, planted in the downstream work of helping people day to day to feed themselves, but you got to keep that other foot planted upstream, where the solutions really lie.
yep.
And not only do you get a pain in the crotch from that stretch, you also get, a little schizophrenic. And so, it's a challenging thing. But there was a progression I wanted to make based on something you were saying, which is, the big word of the hour, I think, is collaboration.
Mhm.
The way we need to collaborate. We can't have thousands of different projects and programs, in any given locale or state or country, not working together. People who are doing food work,
Mhm.
whether you're working downstream or upstream, you have to be collaborating.
Yep.
I mean, there's 60,000 food pantries in this country. There's over 200 or more food banks, the large warehouse type operation, really, that often supply the food pantries. And over 300 food councils. There's something like 10,000 farmers markets in this country. And there's more and more of everything, you
Right,
know,
right.
and we have to be working together.
Yeah.
We got if we work, we're never gonna find a solution. We're never gonna overcome the big obstacles that we face unless we find good, effective ways to collaborate. And I say that as a person who's tried very hard and often has failed to be able to collaborate. It's not easy work.
Mhm.
It's much easier to go off on your own and be very project oriented, be very sort of almost self-centered in the way you do your work with others than it is sometimes to reach out and work with people with different ideas and different attitudes and even different values, but still share that common purpose of trying to promote food security, promote a more sustainable food system, support the livelihoods of farmers and those in our local and regional food sectors. So, it's darn hard work, and I think but it's the work that we have to commit to.
Definitely. I love that you said that collaboration is so important. I can't help but, just share with you, in our county, we've had some large batches of money that's opened up from the FEMA stuff from COVID. So then that was, pools of money were able to be distributed to different supervisors. And I remember going to the meetings and these are the informational meetings. Here's $1 million that's going out to the community. People can apply to get the funds for different projects in their community to support their community. And I raised a hand. Everybody's like asking questions about their personal projects, and I raised a hand. And this is that I didn't just go to one supervisor. I went to a couple of different supervisors thing, and I'm like, where can we collaborate with other people? Like, what if my project is similar to somebody else's project and we're competing? Like, how can we just collaborate? So, because we want to
Mhm.
do the same thing, or what if where can we do that? And like crickets. Like both supervisors, like nobody had anything to say on that. Like they were just like, "Oh yeah, that's like okay." And then people came up to me afterwards, like pe other people in the community were like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. We feel alone, and I'm really stressed doing this myself."
Hmm.
But just to think about that, there isn't even a collaborative space when there is these pools of money that are being distributed, you know?
Yeah, I give this a it's that's I mean it's great. It seems like the problem keeps going on, and it's like why is it? There's some irony here. It's easier to divide up the money into small batches and give everybody a little bit than it is to figure out how to keep it together and have a bigger impact, right? Why is it with human nature? Like the easy road is to divide it up and give everybody a piece. That's why Solomon was, a pretty smart dude when you think about it.
Right?
But I give this example. It's in one of my I think my second book, Food Rebels, Guerrilla Gardeners, and Smart Cookin' Mamas, where I give this example of when I was working in Connecticut and we suddenly had a chunk of like $100,000 available for food groups in the state and gathered. I mean, it was a loose coalition. We're sitting around the table. There were a whole lot of food pantries there. The food emergency was getting more severe. More people were lining up at food banks and soup kitchens. And one person said, "Well, look, we got about 20 different food pantries here. Let's just divide it up, equally around the table. Everybody gets 5,000 bucks." And I said, wait, just let's take a moment and think about this. Is there a more creative way we can address this problem? Maybe something that would be more impactful. $5,000 might sound like a lot of money now, but it's not going to go very far. And then it's gone for good, never to be seen again. So we started talking about a food coalition and a group that could do advocacy at the state level. And if we could hire one or two staff people, we could really have an impact and maybe get more money. Well, thank God that that idea won that day. And we ended up with a great statewide coalition that did over probably 20 years, did amazing advocacy work and netted tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of state funding for food work. Now, I've never seen a better return on an investment in my life than when we were able to take $100,000 and turn it in over time, turn it into, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, as opposed to, what would have been $100,000 of food that would last the state a week or two, maybe, if you're lucky. So that, I was lucky that day. I was lucky, but I think also people had a tendency to be looking for that. They were looking for collaborative solutions, and it takes work, it takes practice, it takes a little expertise to bring about that. And I would encourage people to, if you don't feel like you have it in-house, look for it outside, because there are people, consultants and others, who can really help you work through those kinds of challenging moments.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and the nuance of that is that, the entities that are operating kind of to the counter human needs and counter to human alleviation of suffering, they're causing the suffering, right? They're very sophisticated in how they invest in shifting policy and how they in influencing policy. They're very sophisticated and invest in hiring people to, motivate and inspire. So I mean that's real, and so where's the foodies and the people who care about food and health doing the same thing on the other side, right?
I think as much as we can sit here and rightfully bemoan the political landscape as we see it in Washington, um, and decry the abuse and the inhumanity of our own leaders, we got to look at ourselves too. We got to look at what we're doing locally and the people we've worked with over the years. And these are our partners, these are our collaborators, and we have to, when things get, to say, when things get tough, the tough get going, and we got to get a little tougher about our own ability to collaborate and to look for more of our own internal solutions or community-based solutions, as much as we need to continue to uh, beat up on an administration which has disregarded its own people. Um, both actions are required. We need to be in the streets on those days when it's called for, and we also need to take care of our own. And so, the job's bigger. The job's bigger. We're big enough to do it ourselves, but you can't neglect one.
No.
It's again, it goes back to the upstream or downstream. That pain in the crotch, which won't hopefully last forever.
Well, I mean, I want to say earlier when you gave me that metaphor, I was like, well, that's why yoga helps, both for your mind and for your stretching. You can
Good.
definitely
I love it. Yeah. There you go. We
it deals
call
with
it
the schizophrenia.
community food system yoga.
Exactly. Well, I mean, as we're closing up this conversation, I do want to pose a couple of really important questions. I love asking folks who come on Political Hope. One is, Mark, I feel you've written some incredible books. You've given lectures and talks, and I mean, you've done so many amazing things in your life, and you've also like helped start community gardens and farms and food projects. Even like hearing about your stories in Vermont and everything. That's so awesome. But what if things were to line up the next, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and the best possible things happen, like the most optimum things happen in your life or what your work, your life and your work. What do you think happens? Like what's happening in 5 years? Like breaking the glass ceiling, what's happening?
I'm gonna address that two ways. One obvious thing is that in 5 years we got to have a new administration in Washington, and we have to have, it has to be guided by, the principles and values that have guided this country for 250 years. Okay, that goes without saying. But I think the other part is that, and if you'll indulge a commercial moment, my book, The Road to a Hunger-Free America, uh, available from Bloomsbury Press, available at the that other company that starts with an A, um, and other sources, has many examples of what I think the future of a hunger-free America looks like. You know, in West Virginia, there are some local leaders in a community where the coal industry used to be dominant and is now basically dead, taking over some land and turning it into a wonderful community farm that's doing multiple things, like it's feeding seniors, it's helping out at food pantries, it's starting new jobs and businesses that are food related, it's collaborating with tourist industries, collaborating with restaurants, it's providing amazing educational and internship opportunities for young people.
Wow.
So it's in the Okay, to remember it's in West Virginia. It's in I think it's Fayette County, Fayette County. Um, but then, and then going to other parts of other examples, I have this wonderful woman, a pediatrician that I met a number of years ago in Central Virginia. Her name is Normali Fernando, and she as a pediatrician, she was tired of seeing all these children come in with the same problems, which were bad eating. They were bad. It was bad eating problems, and bad food, and not knowing how to prepare food, and so forth, and decided to completely change her practice to a business model that she calls Dr. Yum. Dr. Yum.
That's
And
great.
she's a force of nature. She's a wonderful woman, and she has after she ran Dr. Yum and did the practice for 10 years, she started a business that's now Dr. Yum something, a business, a corporation, but she's providing assistance to other pediatricians all across the country who want to use this model of basically treating health problems as food problems. So food as medicine, food as medicine. So that's a future that I see us embracing, food as medicine. And I see West Virginia as embracing a model of a more community-based agriculture that has multiple benefits, that's multifunctional in terms of its community impact. Um, uh, and I go through I look at my book and I say, oh, this is good example here. This is great, and there's just so many good ways of thinking about this. But I think that everyone does start at the community level. It starts at a place where we come together as a community. We say, what is going on here? What are the kind of problems we have, and what are the solutions? And what do we already have in
Yeah.
place? And who do we need to hold accountable?
Yeah.
Right? And so, again, I see a whole
Yeah.
big policy piece in the future, including one that's frankly political. And I see another piece which is very down home, very focused on the individual, very focused on neighbor, helping neighbor, and just a lot of the inspiration of enterprising people that find in food work something that is challenging but also solves other problems, many problems within a community.
I love that. That's beautiful. On that note, Mark, what advice or encouragement? I mean, it is midterms coming up here in California. There's election year later this year. What is your advice for people to get civically engaged? Whether they're millennials or young people or older folks, what's your encouragement with civic engagement?
Get involved. I mean, don't hold back. Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons to be cynical, to be depressed and frustrated. If you give into that, it's only going to get worse. Um, you have to say, all right, is there a campaign I can work on? There's so many good people running for office now. I mean, people are rising to the occasion. This is an occasion that, these midterms are, you have no idea what's riding on these midterms, bro. I mean, this is the time when things are going to either get a whole lot better or they're going to get a whole lot worse. And, um, and it's going to affect each of us individually, no matter how well off we might be, or even old white guys like me. We're gonna take the heat too. So you have to get involved in a campaign with somebody who is about change and who is going to return us to the values that we do have as a nation, and we care about each other. Or give money, give time, write letters to the editor, write op-eds, work with other groups, have fun doing it too. This isn't like, doesn't have to be a burden. Um, you know, have watch parties. Get together with other people. Maybe do it as a fun social event,
Mhm.
but with a political purpose in mind, getting the right people in office. I think it's going to happen. I am, of course, I'm optimistic. Turn that dial up, and but we're
Count
never going to change. We're going to keep that channel out there on optimism. WR optimism, and
our optimism
put
coming to
the
you 24/7.
yeah 24/7 money talks. Nobody walks. We
We
we right here, and
we
we're gonna do it.
we provide you with countervalent optimism, all right?
Every 100th caller gets some countervalence.
Mark, thank you so much. Thanks for jumping into this hot seat, this political hot seat, which is not that hot.
It
Actually
wasn't.
quite
It was
comfortable.
fun. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, is there anything else you want to share? I'll definitely share and promote the book. And is there anything else that you want to share before we close out this chat?
Uh, One thing, if you're a person, interested in food, some aspect of food, you know, do this. Have this one little challenge. Find another person with a slightly different interest in food, and talk to them. If you're a consumer, talk to a farmer. If you're a farmer, talk to somebody working at a food bank. If you're working at a food pantry, talk to somebody who's an advocate. Have a conversation with somebody. It shouldn't be threatening, it shouldn't be difficult, and learn. In other words, learn something new.
I love that. Oh, pin that one. Boom. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Ritzy.